Hey, Patricia.
Hi, Kim.
How are you? How was your weekend?
I am doing well. It's that moment when we transition from spring to summer, and it feels like a million things are happening. So, all is well. I went to visit my friend Luis Pazo's gallery over the weekend. So, that was a little fun thing I did.
So that's Pazo Fine Arts, and that was in the DC space or in the Kensington space?
That was in the DC space. He is showing the work of two wonderful visual artists. The show is called Second Spring, and the artists are Brian Michael Dunn and Ikeler.
Nice.
How about you? What is not happening with you? Because I know there's a lot happening.
What is not happening with me? What is... Well, it was a neat weekend, but it was also kind of one of those like reality weekends, right? My friend, photographer Jonah Frank, who lives in Santa Monica Canyon, she has a pass so she can actually drive up PCH. And we went to the Weissman Museum, which is in Pepperdine, and we drove up PCH. And that was the first time that I had driven up since the fires. And that was real. I mean, it was like, it hit me like it hit me when I went to Altadena. It was just that sort of moment when you know intellectually what has happened, and then you see it and you feel it. And you feel it with every fiber of your body. And it's just, I was like a broken record going, oh my God, and that, and that. It was just one of those moments. But then once we got to Pepperdine and we saw Karl Handel's show and we got to give Andrea Gyorody, the director there, a giant hug, the community all came together and the show was fantastic. Oh my God. Like some shows you see and you're like, okay, that's a solid show. And then some shows you walk in and you're like, wowza, that killed.
What was amazing about it? Tell us a little bit more.
You know, I've known Karl's work for a long time, and I've known Karl for a long time, and seeing the depth and breadth of his work in like a mini retrospective, but he used the space really beautifully. This is kind of one of those weird spaces that goes up 3 or 4 stories high and is kind of a little bit squat, so it's kind of a little weird, you know. And he went floor to ceiling, full volume. His drawings can hold it. He broke up the space with different shapes of paint. It was a fully conceived show from the floor to the ceiling. And that's my favorites, is when the artist really thinks about the space. They really think about the viewer experience. And yeah.
I love retrospectives, by the way. As an art historian, I absolutely enjoy immersing myself into the artistic life of one single artist. It's so rewarding always to me. And, as somebody who is writing a monograph and a single artist, I just feel like it's an education into what it means to live a creative life and to see also the expanse of an artist's work, to see how they conceive huge works of art from a sketch or a drawing and how it then materializes into these big artworks. It's beautiful. So I totally get the feeling.
Yeah, and the benefit of this one is that it's not a full retrospective. And so it didn't have to go chronologically. And so the works were mixed in, like early works were mixed in with older works, and pieces were hidden in little corners next to the floor. It was really delightful. And then we went all of the way around to Susanne Vielmetter's to see Whitney Bedford's show. And that was incredible. And she also lives in the canyon near Jonah and was affected by the fires. And you can see it in the paintings. There was this point when you kind of look at the paintings and they're palm trees, but you realize the palm trees are burnt. And like having just seen John Divola's Zuma series the week before, these sort of paradise as disaster was a really interesting through line. And Whitney's just a master painter, so that's always delight. And it was a really interesting way to go crosstown odyssey to the two shows and have a through line being the landscape.
I love it.
But we have our season finale coming up, so let's get into it.
Let's go.
Welcome to The Art Equation.
Welcome to The Art Equation, a podcast from Now Be Here. I'm one of your hosts, Patricia Ortega, an art historian and independent curator.
I'm your other host, Kim Schoenstatt, a contemporary artist and organizer of Now Be Here, a directory of and for women and non-binary artists.
On this podcast, we have a little charla, a little bachipapo about making art and making exhibitions. We invite fellow artists, curators, archivists, and people from different areas of the art world to share their knowledge and their experience.
We are curious about what goes on in the day-to-day of arting. We want to talk shop, get in the weeds about what goes into art shows, talk with the makers and the doers of the art world. Welcome to the Art Equation.
And welcome to our season finale. Oh gosh, it's been such a trip, such a journey talking with Kim, and I'm just so excited about today's episode. We have created the official Art Equation mixtape for you all. It's a potpourri of clips of our wonderful guests this season. The idea was to ask this question to each one of our guests, and the question came from Kim. So, Kim, why don't you tell us a little bit more about where this question comes from?
Okay, so the question is, but is it art? And it came from my time when I worked with Baldessari. On the weekends, we would go see art. We'd drive all around town and go hop from show to show to show to show. And in between, grab some lunch, blah, blah, blah. Occasionally, I would talk and notice something and say, oh, I like this piece of furniture, or something about this architecture, or somebody's outfit, or some cool shoes. And John would quip back, but is it art? And I was still growing artistically. Like, I started working for John right out of undergrad. So I was still coming out of Chicago, which was pretty clear about what was art and what wasn't art. Those Chicagoans had very clear definitions of like, that is not art. And so when John would ask this question, it kind of twisted my noggin, it scrambled my brain a little bit and really made me think about where are these boundaries? And the boundaries of art are still something that I think about today.
Fascinating. Yeah, since you brought up this theme and since the moment you proposed to explore this with our guest, I've been thinking so much about this question. And, coming from our history, I can't help but think about how this question does a couple of very disruptive and provocative things for us, right? It pokes at the seriousness of conceptual art by inserting a sort of ironic twist through this sort of deadpan kind of humor to this idea of art as idea. The tautological model of conceptual art, right? The notion that art can be just the gesture of pointing to the idea of art itself while shifting the attention away from the object meant a kind of inflection in the trajectory of art, particularly as it became a form of institutional critique around the late 1960s. So this question asked by Baldessari is hilarious to me because it punctures that very gesture of pointing to the ideas, the constructs and beliefs of art itself as something other than the object, but demands that we come up with a sort of new definition for it. In any case, I think it calls attention to the inevitability of art being a shared experience, even when it is continuously redefined, or because it is continuously redefined. As you just said, we sort of find ourselves having to put in place these boundaries so we can all find some common ground.
Yeah. And that was John's whole thing with the commission paintings, right? His rather crass response to Al Held saying, like, conceptual art is just pointing at things. And then he turned a snide comment into a lifetime of pointing at things or juxtaposing images or text and images or just image on image. And I mean, one of the things too is his titles themselves are worth looking into if you haven't had a moment. I'm thinking about one in particular right now, which he did for... It was a magazine insert, and it was a series called Crowds with the Shape of Reason Missing. And I'm thinking a lot about that right now. But yes, back to the but is it art question and pointing at stuff. This goes hand in hand. Like, his videos did this too. And I'm thinking of the video I Am Making Art or Folding Hats, doing this kind of nonsense acts and imbuing importance into it. Of course, this has carried through or dissolved into the shared experience of people making toast on TikTok.
Yes, he is definitely the trickster of conceptual art. He probably redefined conceptual art through this pop art language, right? We love Baldessari here, as you might know, at the art gallery. We are lucky enough to have a series of short films in our collection. I like to show them to my students, even when I teach post-war art. Taras, who is so nice, usually sets them up for me in the Herman, Maril Teaching and Research Gallery. But this particular series of 4 films from 1972 and 73, these were born out of Baldessari's famous assignments to his students, which I also use in my classes, where I invite students to create their own funny pieces of conceptual art. But in these assignments, he will participate too. So he decided to film some of his own contributions to these class assignments, and that is basically the story behind these films. But they're great. I love them because, again, they have this absurdity and this humor that, to me, pays homage to and more closely aligns with the tradition of Dada and with Duchamp. But at the same time, sort of working against the seriousness of New York conceptual art. So you find references to Hollywood culture and cinema, but also they reflect on the nature of everyday activities. They raise these very exciting questions about authorship and originality, the separation of material and idea, art and production, particularly in the context of this huge production industry behind Hollywood.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's interesting you were talking about his teaching, because he always said you can't teach art, but you can set up a situation in which art might happen. And so making art with his students, right? Like setting up the situation where he was working and they were working and everybody was just at the same level working. That's a situation where art might happen and ideas might get exchanged. So out of this question of, but is it art? We decided it would be fun and generative to ask our guests to talk about it and figure out and name a thing that they previously didn't consider art, but now think is 100% art. So let's get to our clips.
Let's take a listen.
My name is Lisa Diane Wedgeworth, and the thing I think now art is the range of what abstraction can be. I had a very limited perspective of what abstraction is. Even though I teach and I encourage my students or use language to help them expand their perspectives, for myself in my own making and studio, I was very limited. So I've given myself permission to understand what that looks like. But also, this is going to be interesting or a little silly. Just recently, and this is a new thing, I was on Instagram. And you know when you're on Instagram scrolling, you get those ads or promotions and it'll say learn more, where there's a video. It's from some gallery. I only saw it once. I can remember it and I haven't looked at it since. And he's talking about abstraction. And in the background, you say very traditional abstraction. Also, or we can use the word, non-objective works. But he mentions hard edge. And then he shows a painting of some architectural painting that's not hard edge, but you can see the artist's hand. And he's like, and this is abstraction. Or there's something else that's abstract, what we would know is abstract, but there are some representational images. And this is abstraction, because abstraction is really what an artist wants it to be. He says something like that. And I'm like, thank you. So for me, it's a genre or a concept of art that I'm allowing myself to expand and understand, which is freeing for me.
Elyse Driscol. I actually find myself having to think of the reverse of that. Just like working in an institutional setting, I tend to see everything as being precious in some way. And now that I work in the archives and I might be preparing like a fax paper for display as opposed to pastel, I still approach it the same and how to care for it and prepare it for programming. But I tend to have to remind myself that it's not art. So yeah, just to put a spin on that.
Melissa Huddleston. Elyse and I did not talk about this before, but I have the same answer she has, which is I more often have the experience of being told something is not art, but I feel like it is art, and I can't really escape that feeling. And I think the breast dress, which I talked about earlier, is a really good example of this. We had a study day with Anne Gauldin, and she was very clear this was a costume, this is not the artwork, which is true. But, you know, I spent so much time with this dress and thought about it so much, and it was made by artists. She used her hands and her body to make this dress. It's really beautifully crafted the way it's put together. It's so thoughtfully put together. It just has so much meaning. It has such an aura about it. And I started thinking about, is it possible for an object to be art even if the person who made it swears that it's not art? Or can something become art through its own path over time? I think for myself, I really want to approach the world with a very expansive idea of what art can be. And I mean, we put so much emphasis on what an artist intended, which is the right thing to do in our line of work. But I think as a thought experiment, I like to think about what role a viewer plays in if something is an artwork.
Hi there, my name is Yayoi, and I serve as the VP of External Affairs and General Counsel at Powerhouse Arts. And the question you've asked me is, what did I think was ever not art, but then 100% became convinced that it was art? And I think for me, given my background at the intersection of art and law, I'd like to think that legal scaffolding that helps art and helps artists and artistic practice can be a form of art in and of itself.
Hi, I'm Julie Wolfe. And my "but is it art" is, I feel that everything around me is art. I'm so laser focused on the artistic side of life. One of the experiences I had visiting a museum was first seeing Mola textiles. And it really struck me because they were these applique textiles made by indigenous Guana people. And the applique technique was so inspiring to me, and I was so drawn in and realized the intricate techniques that were used. I never would have thought, actually, of textile arts and applique being an art form. I don't know why now, but at the time I thought, wow. And so that was one of the art forms that I came across where I really had this kind of eureka moment of how incredible that technique could show so much about the women and their culture and their life. Basically, the molas were the fabric of their daily life. And it must have been so empowering for them to have this art form as part of their daily life. The idea of just your own identity being captured within the art just became such a stronger feeling for me.
So my name is Sala Elise Patterson, and I would say my life, I never thought about it as anything other than something that you did, you just lived. But I turned 50 in September last year, and I look back and I can see that I made choices in much the same way that an artist makes a mark on a canvas or an incision and, a piece of material. And that out of that, something bigger and more exciting came into being. I recognized the role that chance played also in the same way that chance plays an investigation in an artist's work as well. And looking at my life now at 50, I can see it's something incredibly beautiful and unique of my own making. It's my own work of art.
My name is Elizabeth Botten. I think everything is art. I think many years ago, I had a harder time with conceptual art and performance art, but I think the more I've experienced life and understood the world, I've come to appreciate it more through expanding my views and growing up a little bit.
Hi, I'm Ruby Lerner, and my answer to the question is, how is it not art?
My name is Nancy Baker Cahill, and the art that I might not have considered art before might surprise you, but I actually feel that the animated series Arcane is one of the most electrifying visual experiences I can remember. It's a TV series. It is so binge-worthy. And the range and plurality of animation that they use to tell these stories, this really is a story between two sisters. I literally felt myself gasping watching it because you had everything from the most sophisticated animation techniques that I know of, at least as of today, and then they would pivot and it would just be rough line drawings. I don't know if anybody's seen La Jetée, but you just have a series of stills. They were probably concept drawings that became part of the storytelling. And I thought, this is breathtakingly original, breathtakingly unexpected. And so while I will say, somewhat critically, some of the writing, it's not going to win any Emmys, but visually and the characters were so deeply compelling that it stayed with me in a way that I could not have anticipated and really, really inspired me. I just thought, this is unbridled animation. This is animation without limit. And then one other thing I'll say, back to TV, and this is probably a more controversial take, but Nathan Fielder's The Rehearsal, while deeply cringy and uncomfortable, which is of course the point, to me, at times, and I won't say universally, but at times, the performance of it feels to me like some of the best art that I've seen in performance. It gets at the thing that happens in performance where you simply don't know what's going to happen next. And it makes you deeply uncomfortable. And I'm always interested in things that make me deeply uncomfortable. So I would say those are my two examples of, I would call them art. I think they qualify as art, even though they are in a more populist medium. I think that they're art.
My name is Matilde Guidalli, and my answer to "But is it art?" is a piece by Walter de Maria called Cricket Music. The piece consists in drumming. De Maria was a visual artist trained as a drummer. I heard this piece, Cricket Music, which is drumming that at some point merges with field recording of crickets. And the drumming is just constant drumming. It doesn't seem to have much variation in its melody or pitch or other things that one would associate with Western music. There is just steady drumming that then gradually becomes crickets in a field.
I love all of the answers, and I love the spontaneity and the candidness of all of our guests with what is really a difficult question. It's not as simple as it seems. So on the one hand, I feel a lot of answers are very imaginative and optimistic and exploratory and open-minded and make me think about this artist in the eye of the beholder kind of idea, right? But then I was fascinated by Ruby Lerner's answer and how she says, well, what is not? And I'm thinking like, well, sort of the same can be said if you flip not the question but the statement and say, well, if all is art, or if art is everything, then nothing is. And so, again, back to Baldessari and this idea of whether we keep pushing the boundaries of what art is to include more things, more people, more aspects of our lives, the more we're going to need to still designate a special place for it.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, because the question does become, then what is art?
Yes.
And how do you know it when you see it? Because if everything's art, then how come we're saying, well, this one thing is worth X amount and this other thing is not worth X amount? It's interesting to me because these boundaries of art concept started with a more simple question of how far can we push this idea of what is art and what isn't art, like what fits in the bucket and what doesn't. But now that we don't have buckets and we have an industry and we have a profession, right? Like this is a billion-dollar industry, and now we have to defend why things have value and don't have value.
Yeah. And I always go back to this experience that was foundational in my life, which was when I had the opportunity to be in one of the slow-looking exercises with Rika Burnham. And it was facing this painting from colonial Peru of this virgin and, looking at it and contemplating this religious art, that it became very clear to me that that experience of contemplation and that experience of being present, what it does to us, the little fringe that it opens into our everyday experience, I think that is what art is, or what art does. It still needs a special place, even if it comes to us in the everyday life.
But are you talking about, that's a vetted experience, right? You're talking about you went to either a museum or a church and saw this?
It was at a museum.
Yeah. So it was already selected. It was already blessed in some way.
Well, the artwork was, but the experience itself wasn't. It became this situation that you were talking about that asked me to engage my senses and my full self, to bring my full self into this experience. And that's the fringe. That's what it opened a crack into just the mundane.
Yeah, it gets really interesting because there is something that's really agitating me lately, clearly, is this sort of who gets in the door and who doesn't get in the door. Or this one artist gets discovered, in biggest air quotes, in their 80s, and this other artist got discovered in their 20s. As a woman artist, being discovered in your 80s is not... That's kind of how it goes. But they were there all along.
Yes.
These artists have been working all along. So why now? What's happened now? But I think it is a really generative and complicated question, even in its simplicity. And I love Sala's answer of her life is art.
Yes.
Being present, like an Abramovich kind of approach, treating each moment as an experience and as a thoughtful experience is an interesting way of going about it.
It is. I love Sala's answer too. And we always, again, think, art is somewhere else. And just to think that it's the closest thing to us, right? It's the very material of life. I think it's beautiful and it's very inspirational. Well.
Yeah, and then Julie's one about the Mola textiles was really interesting also because, she's almost talking about an archive, right? This is a sort of an ongoing documentation of somebody's life and identity, and yet being captured within a textile, which for the art world, it had sidelined textiles for a long time. That was women's work, like Annie Albers. They all got pushed over to the side to make decorative items.
Craft.
That's right. And so now it is firmly art. We have merged the craft with the art. So but is it art question, I'm curious to see what other industries and what other siloed children in the art making space will be accepted and blessed as capital A art next.
And the difficult situation we have right now with the arts, the threats to the continuation of artistic institutions that receive government funding, like the Endowment for the Arts, which has been removed from a lot of groups that do amazing work. So even right now in the world that we're living, some people are trying to sort of downplay the role of art and the special place of art, which is a shame because it's right at the moment when it's most exciting, when it's becoming a lot more expansive and inclusive. There is this sort of backtracking that's happening that's really sad.
Oh, 100%.
But also because it's being reduced to the sort of function, this graphic design or industrial design and marketing, and it's going more into things that are more practical and that have a purpose and that make a profit. And I think Baldessari here reminds us that the absurd has a very important role within systems that try to confine creativity and the imagination.
Absolutely. Absolutely. No, there is a very big push right now from our own government to rewind the definition of art. But horses out of the barn, we're in the field. Nice try.
But is it working? That's the question.
I don't know. But, I think about this a lot. And in the Ruby Lerner episode, she talks about how the art world, it's a series of loss and how we're always ceding ground and how we're always giving something up. But it's also a moment of finding other outlets. Creative Capital was born out of the NEA not giving artists grants. So was Anonymous Was a Woman.
Yes.
That grant was born out of frustration with the NEA not supporting artists. So I am, what's the phrase, nauseously optimistic about what's going to happen next, because now it's time for people to step up and say, this is important and we do need this, and this is how our society is going to be better.
Yes, I agree.
So on that note, feeling optimistic about the future, but I'm curious as to what our listeners think. Please leave us a comment. And it's been just such a pleasure this season to talk with all these interesting people.
Yes, and thank you to all the artists who were with us and talked to us and took the risk to answer this very generative and exciting question and gave us something very cool to talk about.
And I think it's an ongoing conversation. I'm really excited to see what happens with our next upcoming guests and explore the ideas with everybody. I mean, it's been so cool to be able to talk with people in the art world this whole season. And thank you to everybody who participated. It's been just such a joy and a pleasure.
Yes, and thank you to our listeners who have been close to us in this journey as well.
And one last time, we want to do our wrap up with some thank yous. Thank you to Sky Park Tausig, our amazing producer who keeps us on track and keeps everybody organized. Taras Matla at the University of Maryland Art Gallery. Jonathan Fermansky for continuing to let us use your music. And thank you again to our listeners for coming along with us on this season. We had a blast and we're grateful for your support throughout this project. We will not be back in 2 weeks, but keep an eye on our social media and website for updates. Have a great summer, y'all.
Bye.
Bye.
We are The Art Equation. You can find us wherever you listen every other Thursday.
Thanks for being here with us. We'd really love to hear your thoughts. So please subscribe. And if you have a moment to leave a review, it really helps us out. We love the feedback. Talk to you soon here on The Art Equation. The Art Equation is a podcast from Now Be Here with support from the University of Maryland Art Gallery. Now Be Here is a directory and resource created by and for women and non-binary artists. You can find more information at www.nowbehereart.com. Oh my God.